Fair warning, you did hear that little bleep. We are recording this. Yeah, that little magical owl in front is a microphone. So if you're sitting nearby, no secrets. We're all going to find out at some point if you're sharing any secrets. I have to remember that. So I'm going to be sitting right by you. So good evening and welcome. My name is Sherry Sanderson and I'm the library director here at the Boulder Junction Public Library. And joining me tonight are Jane and Josie from the Boulder Junction Historical Society. And I thank them for bringing treats tonight. I thank some of my other volunteers for bringing homemade treats tonight too. I did not bake anything tonight. I did put banana bread in the freezer and completely forgot about it though. So I am so pleased you can join us tonight. This summer, the library is once again partnering with the Boulder Junction Area Historical Society to present Our Story, a monthly history series. We invite you to join us for our next Our Story program on Thursday, August 28th for a night of story gathering in preparation for our town's 2027 centennial celebration. So we are trying to get the ball rolling with gathering stories. We're going to create some website entries of video stories, audio stories, but we're also going to be creating a commemorative booklet with the written stories in. So on Thursday, August 28th, we're going to have some recording devices and we're going to ask people to bring stories. So what are some examples of stories? Funny animal stories. The bears at the dump. How many times have we heard it? Can never hear it enough. It's an awesome story. Maybe you met your husband or your wife in Boulder Junction. Maybe you did something incredible that brought you to Boulder Junction. Stories about characters in Boulder Junction. I know there was a lot of characters and still are a lot of characters in Boulder Junction. So we're going to gather all different kinds of stories. We're going to start compiling them this August program in our Muskie Jamboree History Day. Some of these occasions we're going to be at tables with forms you can fill out. We can make appointments, private appointments to record your stories one-on-one here at the library. You can submit them online. We'll be sharing our new website where you can submit a file, whether it's a print story, a written story, or an audio story, or a video story. The idea is to celebrate 100 years by sharing 100 years of stories. So that will be August 28th. You don't have to sign up in advance. You don't have to be pre-approved, but I probably will read a disclaimer about what kinds of stories are not appropriate. And then our last Our Story program of the year will be on Thursday, September 25th. We will have a presentation about Dr. Kate, Angel on Snowshoes, with the volunteers from the Dr. Kate Museum. So they have not presented here at the library in quite a while, so I thought it was about time that we brought them back up as well, since Dr. Kate is such a huge part of our history. And for that list of Our Story programs for the next 2 times, you're not memorizing it, I know that. There are flyers over on the cart. It's also on our Facebook page and our website, as well as all of the other programs we still have going on this summer. We do still have several authors coming, and then look forward to some stuff to be planned in fall, some September and October programs that haven't been scheduled yet, but we plan to do some programming in September and October as well. Since we will be talking about the history of our area tonight, I feel it is important to share our land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that we are speaking to you from the lands of the Anishinaabe, or Ojibwe Indigenous people of Wisconsin. These lands were ceded to the U.S. government in the treaties of 1836, 1837, 1842, and 1854. These lands are now the location of 6 federally recognized Ojibwe tribes, and where they exercise treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather in ceded territories. Nearest to us is the federally recognized tribal community of Lac du Flambeau Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians. The Boulder Junction Public Library would like to acknowledge the historical and contemporary relationships with the Ojibwe people, descendants, and members from other tribes living in our area, as well as our diverse communities here. We would like to recognize and support the resilience and strength of Indigenous people. We express our gratitude for the homelands we reside on and for the opportunity to gain knowledge from and collaborate with First Nations people in Wisconsin. And now, our presenter tonight is Jim Boburn. Jim taught high school American history during his 34-year career as an educator and completed his master's degree in history at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point in 1987. He also has led 2 archaeological surveys on the Manitowish Waters chain of lakes, digitally archiving numerous historic documents, worked as a project historian on 2 fur trade survey grants with the Lac du Flambeau Tribal Historic Preservation Office, while continuing active cultural and historic research in the Northwoods. In 2022, he received a Historic Preservation Award from the Board of Curators at the Wisconsin Historical Society. In 2023, Jim received the Bixmer Award from the Forest History Association of Wisconsin for Historic Preservation and Education. Please welcome Jim and enjoy tonight's program.
There, how does that sound? Okay?
Okay.
Well, tell me to raise the mic if I need to. Thank you so much for coming here. I really appreciate it because this is the first time I've really done this full presentation to a group, and I think there's a lack of awareness about Manoomin, or fall of home. That's what the French called our wild rice, what we refer to. And I want to hopefully create some advocates today. So how many of you have harvested wild rice here already? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you. You can talk about that. How many of you have seen wild rice growing in the Northwoods? There we go. That's great. What you might have noticed if you've been paying attention for a while, wild rice is in a state of decline currently. And as part of my effort to create greater awareness, I, as a historian, want to go over some of the histories of wild rice in the area. I'm going to play 2 clips from Ojibwe talking about wild rice. I'm not a tribal member. I'm not here in that capacity. I'm a researcher and I'm sharing information, but like the land acknowledgement statement, the Ojibwe are my friends. Teresa Mitchell reviewed my whole PowerPoint. She's the curator at the Lac du Flambeau George Brown Jr. Museum and Cultural Center, and I work cooperatively with her and others. I guess before we jump into this picture is on Round Lake right here. That is very squat and short wild rice from a few years ago. That's a historic picture of bundled wild rice on the outlet into Big Lake of Rice Creek. That's what we would hope our wild rice would look like. And I'm working with retired state archaeologist John Boyan and retired Lac du Flambeau Historic Preservation Officer Office archaeologist Cindy Stiles, and we're writing 2 reports on that area. And one is for a nomination for the National Register of Historic Places District, because there's just so much great heritage in the area. But before I get into this, I am going to do something that I've really never done before. But since I'm not an Indigenous person, I'm going to play a video from a Mole Lake tribal member harvesting wild rice. And I hope you enjoy it. And
Live here and understand the world. You gotta love it.
plug it back in.
Some people love money, some people love material things. All of them. Wait. All my stuff. I love this. I do. I love that rice and that lake up there. I loved it all my life. Always my mind to give chocolates and I'm not the one say my say equations to my two. You easy to go on the now there and the now we go. Oh, smoke the mind, you wait. 65 now, so the 55 years I've actually been out here somewhere rice. 508.
Go pick it by our homes. So I learned different things at the moment. That's fun. these two little bony arms, once I get going up there, I don't wanna quit. I got this rhythm. We call it a wham, wham, wham. That's the rhythm.
Notice how high the race is.
Forward,
It's up on the left it is.
goes into the race stuff and tries to get the best heads he sees. So that guy's rhythm gets all them plants on both sides. As much as we can get in every 2 hits. He's pulling. I'm keeping that tap. In my mind, every time I hit the new plant, I'm saying, "We wish." Thank you. Every me witch in my mind. And then the rice comes in for me. Because I'm honoring and praying to that rice. Giving it that respect that for to keep me and my partners going, no matter if I'm pulling or the guy tapping the reel. I touch the cedar sticks on that rice and it comes off. I know that babies are going to eat. My drum's going to be fed. The life's going to go on for another year. That's gratitude. Grandma used to call it roasting and parching. She liked to use the word roasting better than Rona. What she did with her hands and fire and do what she used to make that come out dehydrated enough to last all winter for 5 years. Maybe you don't get it wet or you store it right, it'll be good for the medicine.
Which,
My growing up in my traditions, the older people told me that the Creator gave us this Manoomin to help us survive for a time that we spent here with. It's the Creator's food, and that Mother Earth, she gives it to us to use. That's why they call it a food that grows on water. So I'm trying to keep that for all the Navi people, the prayers going, eating that food every year. Because we believe if we stop that tradition, that the world's going to stop. That's why it's important for the Indian people to keep on their traditions and spiritual
stuff in the restaurant.
because
Not the same.
stop. The world will stop.
Turn that off. Hopefully go back to our PowerPoint. Which is right here. Okay, thanks for watching that. I think it's important to recognize Indigenous communities and the role in history of wild rice and its importance, and that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on a lot of the historic images, wild rice in this area, what I found as a researcher, a little background on it, and then some of the efforts trying to bring back wild rice into this area. So let us go on. This is a bundle of wild rice that can be stored. So wild rice would be harvested here on Big Lake. Oftentimes that wild rice would be taken to their sugar camps. A hole would be dug and it would be placed in the ground, as the gentleman said. That will hold there, and when they come back next spring, that'll be vital nourishment they need in the very hyper intensive labor that it takes to make maple sugar. It is an organized system of seasonal rounds. Now, the Ojibwe's prophecy, many of you may know it, but I need to say it again. They, 1,400 years ago or so, they moved from the East Coast to find where food grows on water. That was cited in there. That is going to be here at Madeline Island, and then ultimately moving into these areas in northern Wisconsin. This is the whole Ojibwe range. The whole migration was predicated on wild rice. That's how important it is. This is an interesting map that we have from 1847, talking about 1840 True Treaty that Sherry talked about. This is the hand-drawn map. This is from the Turtle Portage Band. That is Mercer, Wisconsin. And they drew here where they felt their tribal lands, their reservation would be. That's basically Lac Vieux des Serres, that's Rhinelander right here. This is up around Oma, and this would be down way past Park Falls. So these notions had been around for a long time. The Ojibwe came into this region, and initially we thought it was for the fur trade. We have the Turtle Portage Band of Mercer, the Lac du Flamo Band right here. Here's the fur trade post. This is the Trout Lake Band right here in Boulder Junction. This is the Wisconsin River Band. This is Lake Tomahawk, Lac Vieux des Serres, and that's the Pelican Lake Band there. From those different areas, there are all these rice camps because they move on to all these different lakes. And they came to those villages because there was wild rice there. They needed the rice to survive. Many academics, including myself, ascribe their movements based on the fur trade. That is inaccurate. It was basically to follow Manoomin. That's how important it is for the culture. Here we are in Boulder Junction right here, reading from A.B. Gray's journals in 1846, from Trout Lake down to Wild Rice Lake. Heavy growth of wild rice were passed to the swamps bordering the river. The gathering of this rice in the autumn is usually performed by the squaws in canoes, and it is an article of food much prized by the Indians. That is the kind of explicit evidence that we have with maps that put in bullseye right here in this community of those great traditions, but it goes on from there. The next year, another geologist, A.B. Norwood, came in, and this is the Manitwish chain right here. And this is Manoomin Lake. That is Wild Rice Lake. The name of that lake comes right here, and here's Alder Lake right here, and that Ojibwe, and that's Manitwish. That's still Manitwish Lake today. We have whole journals that go along with this. So these traditions, these maps and alike, show that this is really part of the fabric of the communities as the fur trade and other groups come in together. Now, then the problems start for Manoomin, for wild rice, and it starts with river drive logging and the building of dams. So right here, they said they were putting a reservoir at the 30-foot falls of the Turtle River. That's Lake of the Falls. I just did a pontoon tour on the Turtle Flambeau flowage all day today before I came here. That is one river, and here's another one on Rest Lake, and they said they could raise the water 25 feet in Manitwish waters. You raise the water 25 feet, you will kill all the wild rice. This is the outcome that I'm speaking to. This is the Park Lake area. This is an Army Corps of Engineers map from 1878, and this shows that first dam there at Lake of the Falls, and this shows all the rice that would be inundated at that point. Here is Wild Rice Lake there. You can see the red line is how much the dam was going to wipe out the original shoreline and a lot of the rice. And it basically did. Look how impacted Rest Lake was at that time. So this is from November 6, 1937 on Wild Rice Lake. Notice that there's huge sandy areas. This is the Bakken family. They're Boulder Junction residents off of Bakken Road. That's a stringer of huge walleyes. And notice that they're lowering the water way down. And then they're going to raise it way, way up again. And again, these real vacillations are huge, huge problems. In 1888, we see some of these problems come to the forefront, and the Army Corps of Engineers understands this well. This is in the Wisconsin River area in Minocqua, and here is what the Army Corps of Engineers said. There's a small Indian settlement between Quaggasagan and Tomahawk River, where a few acres are devoted for raising corn and potatoes. Indigenous people had gardens too. And the narrow margins of these plantings would be flooded by the proposed dam. They're putting in a big dam in Minocqua, which would also drown out some quite extensive fields of wild rice covering hundreds of acres. These will be the exceptions. I know of no other injury that would be done to private interests. So in other words, they are acknowledging the wild rice is there. They're acknowledging that they're going to destroy it and they're going to build these dams. And that's on the Wisconsin route. If you look here in Lac de Flambeau, this is the Army Corps of Engineers again. The area to be flooded consists of side of a lake system, mainly of extensive meadows covered with excellent grass. There would also be drowned out some large fields of wild rice, from which the Indians on the Flambeau Reservation derive at present a main item of subsistence. So they get it. Wild rice is important. These Indians expressed great discontent at the possibility of any part of their domain being flooded, even showing a strong disposition to interfere with the progress of our survey. But again, they don't get to do this. What's going to occur is a guy by the name of E.P. Sherry is going to buy the water rights to put the dam right at above the village, the traditional village, and he'll put it in and it'll raise the water in all those areas. So the Bear River right here, that's where that dam is. So systematically from River Drive logging, the Army Corps of Engineers acknowledges that this will destroy Manoomin and wild rice and things like that. This is Joe Gravine. He and I did a joint presentation at FE University on harvesting wild rice. There he is in the wild rice. This is on the Bear River in 2023. And that's good, healthy wild rice and what folks are really trying to get to. So I have a few slides from Joe in here at his work. And when you talk about first, wild rice starts with a seed at this point, and then it sprouts up just a few inches, and then it has this lay down period, and it looks like a lot of other aquatic plants. And now where we are today, they've moved from the lay down part, and then the grass grows straight up and it's beginning to flower. And right now we're seeing the flowering of the wild rice as it pollinates. And at that juncture, that comes and creates those giant seed heads that you saw in the video, right? And those seed heads are actually grass. Wild rice is a grass. And then they can be knocked, as was demonstrated in the video, and they fall in. It's an annual crop, and it needs to be reseeded throughout that time. So this is important. From the 1880s, this is Rest Lake. Here's the Rest Lake Dam right by Camp Joran, the bay next to Camp Joran. If you've ever been there on Rest Lake, this was cited as being loaded with wild rice back in the day. So the wild rice had been present, and it was also all up Papoose Creek, which it is coming in really well. If you want to see wild rice, I would say that's the easiest place to go and just drive down County K before you get to Smokies. Just look up there, and the wild rice is really filling in really, really quite well. But in 1878, we have this documentation of that rich wild rice that was so important. And it was important because it's storable food for winter. And the Ojibwe actually came here on the prophecy in the 1600s of finding where food grows on water, which is Manoomin. But also they came into this area, and by 1745 at Mole Lake, Lac de Flambeau, and Le Coudray, they fought against the Dakota Sioux and drove them from this area. And they did that for wild rice. It is that absolutely important and vital to them. Now with these dams, like the Rest Lake Dam, this is where it was supposed to be built at 25 feet. At the Advanced Lake, this is where it is by the Pea Patch today. If you've ever been to Manitouish waters, that put a 16-foot head of water on the Manitouish chain. Right now it's at 8 at summer levels. It's another 8 feet higher. And we have from the records from Rest Lake all the way up the gradient for every lake. We have all of this documentation by the Army Corps of Engineers. Mud Lake 1 is Alder Lake. Mud Lake 2 is Wild Rice Lake, right here in Boulder Junction. And they were very much inundated. So Wild Rice Lake is 7.3 feet higher than the original Rest Lake Dam. But when they raise the water level 16 feet, it doesn't matter. All the rice dies. Do you understand? And this is all the storable food for winter. And there's a spiritual component and the identity of the Ojibwe. So these are real threats that go on, and it really changes the course of this. Just to get an idea, in 1846, when A.B. Gray came through Manitowish waters, he said there are brilliant, picturesque lakes connected by streams barely sufficient for the width of a canoe. Now, if you've been to Manitowish waters and look at the channels, you know, they're really quite a bit bigger. And that is the effect of this damming and raising and lowering water. And of course, wild rice is going to be affected. Even in the Turtle River, right next to the Turtle Portage, this is Rice Lake. Okay, so here's Echo Lake, and right up there is Rice Lake, and you go down the Turtle River, again showing that the Ojibwe villages are in close proximity to wild rice fields. That is absolutely the case as time goes on. But just like in the other areas, phase one logging, they had dams on the Turtle River at Oxbow and Spider and Fisher Lake, Rice and Pike, and the Lake of the Falls. And so here you see Shays Dam. They raise the water that goes all the way up almost to Winchester, wiping out that rice. Now, what occurs that is really important, especially for in the Boulder Junction area, Big Lake, all the way up Rice Creek to Round Lake. And so like this is Boulder Junction and this is Presque Isle. We're not going to feud about this because, you know, there's a kick out here for Boulder Junction. We have weird township lines. The Ojibwe don't care. They're basically seeking these resources, and these are all above the dams. They're so high up. So as all these other systems of wild rice crash for the Ojibwe, this remains. Do you understand? And it goes to an absolute priority. We can even go back to the original surveys of 1862. This is Big Lake right here. And these are Indian trails up to Crab Lake. This is also the subcontinental divide between Lake Superior flow here and Mississippi River flow right here. And again, this is all part of this long transition of indigenous use of this absolutely vital resource. So in our research in Rice Creek, these are all Ojibwe camps that were along Rice Creek. And you can see the frames for the bark and canvas tents and structures that they developed. They would come and they would braid the rice together. Do you know why they might do that? Culturally, why would they braid? Pardon? Yes, it deters the birds, and the birds are a problem. But they can also eat the birds. So they shoot the birds. So this kind of goes back and forth, right? The other thing too is, and this is important, and it's about the Ojibwe and the notion of communities working together. These are like family plots of rice that they're going to gather, and they're going to manage all of this because this is so very important to them. So the care, the management, and the use of this is absolutely critical. This is from Big Lake, and they use canvas tents later on. This is 1922. So this ricing goes forward for years and years and years. So we've worked with the Case family and other families to get access to some of these images. This is Rice Creek again. This is Rice Creek. That's Lac Vieux des Airs. And again, these ricing camps are absolutely critical. And then we have recorded this, you know, the archaeologists, so this will all go in the archaeological site index, and these will be all protected areas. And the fact that they're still viable today and strong, and we have these traditions noted, is really quite important. The Manitowish Waters Historical Society spent a lot of money hiring a podcast specialist, a historical podcast specialist. And what we do is we get old journals and articles and magazine articles, and we podcast them themselves. Most of these are behind paywalls and buried, and you can listen to these stories yourself for free by going to mwhistory.org and click on our podcast or go to our YouTube channel. But in this one, it's Shields Magazine, 1890. They did a canoe trip from Land O'Lakes all the way to the town of Manitowish. And they went into Big Lake. Look at these braids right here. Again, this is Big Lake. You can see the smoke there. Rice Creek empties into Big Lake. And at the mouth of the creek, we got into trouble. That is that we hooked into a muskellunge and lost 15 to 20 minutes and get him in the boat. However, we were in no hurry, so we didn't complain. Having landed the fish, we went ashore, cooked it, and ate it. For breakfast, we ate 3 black bass. We camped on the site of an old Indian village. The Lac de Flambeau Indians come here in August in large numbers, harvest wild rice, and carried away boatloads of it. They have some novel devices for gathering, hulling, taking care of the grain, such as earthen mortars or tubs, flails, pestles, birch bark buckets. And at the close of harvest, they have a rice dance, a great feast, and they dine on rice, fish, ducks, and other such delicacies from their larders surround the surrounding country affords. This is an amazing document right here in Boulder Junction, and it basically reinforces everything that you saw in the video previously. Why do I go into this kind of detail? Well, I'm kind of a history nerd, but also people often make claims about, well, yeah, that went on in our town, and oh, we had that, but they have no evidence. I'm an evidentiary historian, and the evidence in Boulder Junction is overwhelming for these Manoomin traditions, all right? And I think you need to be aware of that, and I hope to inspire some efforts to preserve it going forward. In Forest and Stream in 1895, 5 years later, they say Rice Creek connects with Little Crooked Lake that goes up toward Dairyman's. The creek must get its name from the amount of wild rice that grows there. It would be a great place for ducks. I love this. And in the fact, many of them come there, but the Indians go in to get their supply of rice as soon as it is ripe enough. And they keep such a racket that all the ducks stay away until the Indians are through. Then there's not much left for the fowl. This guy came up here on the train, wants to shoot a bunch of ducks, but he's objecting to the Ojibwe to get storable food for their winter. I find this to be frankly comical, but it does show different worldviews and a kind of disconnect with living in the Northwoods and the reality. This is an image that I'd like to put on Big Lake, but I look at it, I don't think I can, of wild rice. So if any of you can figure out where that picture was shot, there's a house right there, there's a point, there's a lake out there, that would be very, very helpful. But also close to Boulder Junction, the Boulder Junction line is right there, Town Line Road. This is Alder Lake. There's a canal system that goes all the way to Lac de Flambeau right here. But the Lovelace family noted that there was an Ojibwe blueberry camp right here on Alder Lake. That is where Alderwood Resort is today. And this is a picture of a Vilas County blueberry camp, and I can't say it's this one, but people with cameras were there and they were buying blueberries and other things, as I'll show you. All right. So you think about it, from Lac de Flambeau, there's a big effort for the Flambeau community to make money. And oftentimes they would sell things like maple sugar, wild rice, cranberries, blueberries, all available, but also Indian crafts, artifacts that they make and manufacture. And all these yellow arrows were resorts that they could go to. And people from the resorts could come to the blueberry camp, kind of barter on the point of land for these different items. So blueberries like this, these are wild cranberries growing right here. Those are all available in the marshy areas around where the cranberries are grown today. In 1909, here you see images of wild rice, basswood cordage, ribs for birch bark canoes and the like. We see another image of the same family group right here with another piece. And again, the Ojibwe were involved in many exchanges with tourists and others. And this is called an Indian camp on the Flambeau Reservation. This is actually an article from Madison. Lac de Flambeau opens up a new road. It says Lac de Flambeau Indians sold $20,000 in handicrafts to tourists in a single season, explaining the days of railroad travel, I should say, in a single season during the days of railroad travel, it was explained. But you see all these different crafts. This is a moose hall. Have any of you ever seen that before? Yeah, we used to have a lot of moose here. We still have moose, by the way, in Iron and Vilas County. There's like 2 breeding cows there and alike. So these were all important to the Ojibwe. And Manoomin is part of this whole experience. Here, the Devine and Lynch family, Kate Devine, literally lived right on the border on Clear Lake of Boulder Junction, Manchwish Waters, and Presque Isle and Winchester. It's right by the elementary school. That's why they put the elementary school there. But basically, it was said that they and her 9 children, 7 of them are sons, all gathered wild rice. Tom and Mary Haskins were actually videoed, and a Hollywood studio came up and saw them. We are desperately trying to find that video, and this comes from the Rentelman's Journal. And so the Devines were an important Ojibwe family that lived in right on the border of Manchwish Waters and Boulder Junction. And so these are some birch bark baskets and so on. But then it gets more interesting. Let's turn our view a little bit more to the east. All right. We were talking about the Ojibwe. That is all very good. But another Anishinaabe, so the Anishinaabe are the 3 fires. And that journey, it wasn't just the Ojibwe, it was also the Ottawa and the Potawatomi. They all came searching for this and common language and life. There was a significant Potawatomi community between Star Lake and Indian Lake. And several families were there, one of which are the Escanabas. That's a name that may ring a bell, some lakes and so on. All right, this is Princess Escanaba in Star Lake. That's John Escanaba there. And this is in Partridge Lake where the Johnsons still have a homestead. So within the Ojibwe ceded territory, the Potawatomi were also involved in this. This is right here in the core of Boulder Junction. This is Peter Christensen, the assistant forester living at the Trout Lake Station right here. And this comes from John Christensen, who wrote a series of vignettes of the history of Boulder Junction. And he said about his dad loved wild rice. He would eat it on cereal every morning if available. There was a fine Indian family by the name of Escanaba who lived out of Salem. Each fall, Mr. Escanaba would arrive at State House, right here, that's State House, via pony with a sulky sack of wild rice, probably more than 35 pounds. By springtime, the bag was empty. Mr. Escanaba was an impressive gentleman, standing straight and dressed neat as a pin. His family knew how to live within their environment. And so when you learn about this, here are more pictures of Escanaba right here in 1900, and they would actually do dances up at Indian Lake. They themselves were over here in Star Lake like that, and they would actually send train loads, excursionists out from Star Lake like this to go to Indian Lake to go to these kinds of events. That is something that actually happened. They would always also go out on like blueberry and raspberry picking. They would just take the train in the middle of a swamp, like in a couple of weeks from now, give them lunches and things like that. And they go out in the bogs and pick all they wanted. So this was like a thing. So back to the Escanaba, it's kind of interesting. One of the great traditions here in Boulder Junction is your CCC camp on White Sand Lake, ironically named Camp Crystal Lake because it was moved. But notice one of the cabins here, it's called Escanaba. And so here you have Escanaba Lake, right there to this map, Partridge Lake. That's where the Escanabas are between Laura all the way up here. And notice here, Potawatomi Village, signed up on Indian Lake. So again, the Potawatomi are also engaged in the propagation of Manoomin. At CCC Camp Crystal Lake on White Sand Lake, they also had a barracks called Lac du Flambeau. So again, like the acknowledgement statement that we heard from Sherry, we see that there's acknowledgement here in the early days of the CCC. There's another great Boulder Junction Manoomin story that you should be aware of that may make you maybe more inclined to preserve this important traditional crop. Francis Badger lived in an estate on the edge of Big Lake where the inlet came in from Rice Creek. She had an artist cabin there. She was later a famous muralist from Chicago, and she drew not one, but 2 images. One of wild rice harvest. You see the braiding going on here? This is in Boulder Junction. Do you see here the camps, those pictures that I showed you before? And these gentlemen features favor what the Divine Boys looked like. All right, they truly do. This is a Seth Eastman, very famous picture of wild rice. He was attached to the United States military, did most of his drawing in the 1850s, early 1840s. And women did much of the wild ricing back in the 19th century. Notice how tall the rice is. Notice where the seed heads are. You see that? And this is the goal going forward. That is the goal going forward. So one of my favorite people in the world was Pat Robin. She was the first tribal historic preservation officer in the United States of America. She is from Lac du Flambeau, and she was a daughter of one of the Divines. Okay, and she helped me with that the Flambeau fur trade research and alike. But here are the Haskins and Mary Devine. She married Tommy Haskin. And in Haskins Bay at Clear Lake, I mean, Boulder Junction is literally right there. So really, the Devines were here in about 1879, and it's right at the four corners of all of our townships that make North Lakeland Elementary School. How many towns claim them as the original family in their towns? Zero. Not Manitowish Nowaters, not Boulder Junction, not Winchester, not Presque Isle. All right. But their efforts and presence here was super strong. Moving a little forward, this is from another great pioneer family. This is the town of Manitowish. You can see the railroad bridge right there when you go by the Ding-a-ling on the way north. Yeah, I got you located. And these are the Slates, and they are a huge pioneer family. Have done a lot. That's all wild rice through the river there. That's all wild rice that was there. So it can come back after the dams. Do you understand what I'm saying? It is resilient like the forest to an extent, but now it's facing other challenges. This is Bobby McClellan, one of the greatest walleye guides anywhere. And he would have a little newsletter, and he said, remember when the Trout River between Wild Rice, I live on Alder Lake, and Alder Lake was a snake trail through the Wild Rice? You could catch a fish almost anywhere on an artificial lure. And so this is from the Desirous family, and there's all that wild rice. There's that snake trail that Bobby's talking about right there. That's in the 40s and the 50s. When I showed up in 1962 in Manitowish waters, there wasn't a weed in Boulder Lake or in front of my house. You guys know what happened to all of it? Rusty crayfish came in and gobbled it out and created a near sterile environment, except a few husky lilies that could get up at the time. But we had big crayfish, really big crayfish. That's right. One of the other things that people don't know about wild rice, and somebody was talking about mechanically harvesting it with me earlier, is that the LaRoe wild rice farm, this is the Laportes and Reamers, right, thank you. And the Reamers got together and they had an airboat out there and they would do all their harvesting. That was all turned into a cranberry marsh, and I think that land has gone back to nature at this juncture. But there was actually a commercial operation in the area for a little bit of a time. 2 years ago, Kay Kranz, who presents here often, who's a great colleague and historian, she goes up to me, Jim, we're wild ricing at Rice Creek. You see all the wild rice here? And then she said, you know what? There's an area where there's no rice and there's a log cabin there. I go, what are you talking about? So I went to the Boulder Junction book, and guess what? At the Rabbit Foot Lodge on Boulder Lake, you see how they use these square cut logs? Well, Abe Lefebvre used these also on Island Lake. This is all Boulder Junction information, all right? By the way, Kate Newcomb is a half mile upstream from this point, and she came as soon as the railroads were done with her husband. And we have recorded this, and they had these posts in there to keep it in them, and they would run their canoes up there, and they would take trails up to Big Lake from then, and that's how they would move around in the area. But this is in the Archaeological Site Index. The DNR is aware of it, and that will be preserved. So preserving history, contrasting with preserving wild rice, these are the kind of missions that I'm hoping to inspire. Now, if you're interested in this and you want to know more, there's some places that I can point you. And Glyphwick is one of the very best. That's the Great Lake Indian Fish and Wildlife Group. And they talk about the treaties that we discussed before, 37 and 42. And you go down to gathering, and then you pick Manoomin right here, and it highlights all the historical areas of Manoomin. It is not complete. There are some that are missing, but you can get involved yourself and become more aware and be an advocate on your lake association groups, and within your communities to try to protect this. Now, this is the area that we're in right now, and this is where I was today, the flowage. By the way, the wild rice there is in terrible shape. Around Boney's Mound, it used to be dozens of acres of wild rice is literally gone. This is Flambeau right here. There's Island Lake, there's Big Lake, there's Round Lake, and these are your communities. There's Aliquash Lake. You guys have a great, great heritage with this in Alliance. But there are new Manoomin partnerships, and I think you need to be aware how proactive the tribe is being right now. A lot of this came to me in a class that I did with Joe Ravine to present how the wild rice is being taken care of. So Flambeau, Georgia Tech, Northwestern University, Minnesota, and Argonne National Laboratories are all collaborating using technology, data analysis to try and get an idea of how to make a change. Here they are again. This is again all those partners, and these are all indigenous groups that are all involved in this, and that includes Gilfwick and others. So they do biophysical research of the impacts of foreign practices on Manoomin and watersheds. This is very important within the hydrology of it, the water quality, and alike. In addition to this, what they have found with Manoomin, they cannot find any specific issue that can best determine why it's failing. There's a lot of hypotheses, but they haven't found the absolute smoking gun to that effect. And notice they talk about the Ojibwe Dakota use of wild rice. So they acknowledge the Dakota were using the wild rice before that 1745 period again, where the Ojibwe expelled them. But the Dakota continued to gather wild rice out in these areas for quite some time. And then they do water levels and other analysis. And they've done many published reports to this end. And as they go forward within this, they've put it into a tribal framework where they're talking about their research questions in the mindset of the Ojibwe themselves, all right? And so trying to bring forward research that respects the tradition of the Ojibwe and the cycle and the harvest traditions that they incorporate. So then back in Lac de Flambeau, they take phosphorus data points just like this. These are some of the maps that they're keeping. So it's not like people are just complaining and sitting on their hands. There's a movement afoot to get many groups on deck to try to protect these resources. One of the great areas, not quite in Boulder Junction, over in Plum Lake, is Aurora Lake. How many of you have been to Aurora Lake before? It is amazing, and it is one of the better wild rice areas, but I hear it is down right now this year pretty bad. That's a harvest of wild rice 2 years ago in Aurora Lake, and it really was quite a bit better. And this is the creek itself. If you want to go there, you need to go there before the rice comes up because you really cannot move through it because it's usually that thick.
In a good year.
In a good year. Well, there was a time where there was no wild rice in Aurora Lake in the 1970s. None. Absolutely none, because I was on that lake all the time. I worked at Camp Highlands. I did canoe trips through there. There was none of this. And now it's Joe. That's Joe Ravine right there. This is the wild rice. This is 1923. That's pretty good rice. That's pretty good rice. But as we start putting this together and start sharing this information, I said that I worked in Camp Highlands. Camp Highlands is the oldest camp west of the Alleghenies. It was going 15 years before Camp Manitouche was. And here, this is wild rice. These are pictures, that's Aurora Lake in 1920 or earlier. Isn't that pretty cool? So again, we've had these kinds of great crops, but now you're reporting that it's in the atrophy or,
Well, it's weird. 2 years ago, like you said, it came back like I first saw it 20 years ago. It was so dense, you could hardly pull from it.
right,
And, the last year, it failed him. Rice is cyclical.
but it's an annual, so it has to be
Right.
reseeded.
Right,
The seeds can last over a period of time.
true.
But I can tell you in the 70s, over 40 years ago, closer to not quite 50, there was none in it. So you're right, it is cyclical, but these are the questions. Within these, and this is part of it, because I know that Aurora Lake has certain problems. So Georgia Tech, Northwestern, these groups, this is a listening device. And this is an app you can get on your phone, and it listens out at different sites like Aurora Lake, and it listens for predators of wild rice, whether it's swans or geese or muskrats and all the rest. And it's collecting data because they're trying to see how these external, predators of wild rice are making changes. I found that to be absolutely fascinating. They're also using airboats in Lac du Flambeau. This is controversial in trying to, open up and bring out some of the logs, and sometimes wild rice habitat degrades into, less of a water area and more of mud, and then they don't do nearly as well. Wild rice needs flowing water, probably from 1 to 5 feet is the range. 3 feet is optimal with a really, really good flow. If you want to see that, I would say I've done pontoon trips on Island Lake this year already. The Rice Creek stuff looks a little better, but if you go to Island Lake, going to the Island Lake boat landing, and you get up toward between the two campsites that are there, and you look to the right, I mean, it is 200 acres of wild rice. And it is some of the best wild rice anywhere. It's filled with stumps and hard to pull through, but it's really good wild rice. All right. So this is some of the data forms they take for wild rice. They get it from the people who are collecting it. So they're collecting that data. This happened to be on Little Trout Lake. They have a wild rice survey form for those who are out surveying, and they're doing this kind of work. Now, I'm going to show you another video. I told you I was going to do this, but this is again a video of Ojibwe, and I'm going to try to plug things in, and the sound's going to work this time, right? Yeah, it's going to do this. I'm having a positive thought. And Sajin is going to introduce herself, but this is all, it's not Bow Lake, it's Lac du Flambeau centric. And how many of you have seen this video? Right on, you're going to like this. Let's see if it works. We're gonna pause it and we're gonna get.
It is coming through, Jim.
It is.
Yeah.
Should we just try to play it?
Be a little louder.
Headphones?
Manoomin Kwe Dash, Ndunjo Ojibwe Winnacause, Magnindo Dam Gavasquam and Dundra. Hello, all of my relatives. My name is Sajin. I am Loon Clan, and I am a citizen of Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. I have the privilege to be the messenger of the stories and wisdom shared with me by the folks of Waswaganing or Lac du Flambeau, who hold a relationship to Manoomin, the good berry, wild rice, Zizania palastris, the food that grows on water.
My viewpoint is that it's a relative. It's
it's something that we need to steward and take care of. Because it takes care of us at the end of the day. Like, something that the Creator has given us in order to live, in order to be well.
One of the best, natural foods that I know of.
If it has its own spirit, its own life. Obviously, it's a food source, but, seeing it as like the living being that it is.
That nutritional grain that, we all need, and it's that medicine.
Well, rice was one of the reasons the Ojibwe ancestors settled into this area was the prophet from, that I was told came out of the northeast, migrated around the Great Lakes region, and we had to stop when we found, prophet said, place where food grows on water. Got into the Great Lakes area. This is where it was.
Manoomin is very important to me because it plays a vital role in our ancestral diet and provides essential nutrients and sustenance that we need, and it's a very important food in our ceremonies and our cultural practices that we use for pretty much everything.
Going out and harvesting Manoomin and being a part of that entire process. It's really been a part of my healing as an Anishinaabe person. Be out on the water, knocking rice or, push going for someone to the field to just hear that serenity of that ambiance, just there is kind of singing in the wind, hear all those
That's
little
I
birds.
relate
And like part of the harvesting and like that process is constantly holding the respect for that plant.
When you go out on water, you offer your arsenal, you harvest in a good way. And, not only is Manoomin listening to you, watching you, that eagle spirit's watching you, that fish spirit is watching you. And making sure you do it in a good way. And, we're always told to offer some of your harvest back. Like if you go through a rice field, head back in, you see a bare spot, just go through a couple handfuls in that bare spot and try to get it reseeded in that area. And, just giving back.
Reciprocity is necessary for a plant relative that has been in decline since the onset of settler colonialism. The historical decline in Manoomin came from the extensive manipulation of waterways in order to transport true relatives from northern Wisconsin to growing cities of the time like Chicago. The widening of rivers and the raising and lowering of water levels through implementation of dams took away an unfathomable amount of Manoomin habitat.
Come to find out there was a whole lot more.
Yeah.
A whole lot more. Unreal. With the decline of rice that we're experiencing for the past 10 years or even longer, we're probably down to maybe an eighth of what it used to be like.
To me, it's like a central characteristic of who we are as Anishinaabe people. So if we don't have the rights, if we don't have that practice, if we don't have that
for, ceremonies or feasts, that it kind of is a drop in our identity. It's really, key to our identity and, why we came here and stayed here.
It's a creation, story. It's been a part of our tradition and history. So it's a strong, root and plant that we can focus back to show our sovereignty, show the importance and significance of a being to us that will sustain us. It's gonna show us by its declining, population or types of the health of our Mother Earth and what is gonna be the health of us if we don't do what we have to protect it. It's a sign.
Say, just don't take it for granted, because if you do, it'll probably go away. It has a life of its own that evolves, 365 days and out of the year, so, we want to make sure that, that part isn't forgotten.
Gives us something to keep fighting for, and that ties us all together.
We continue to respect and honor it, and don't take it for granted.
It's life. It gives us a purpose that hopefully in the future gives a lot more people a purpose.
It's part of the family legacy, I guess. I mean, my grandma and grandpa, when they were young, and waking up early in the morning, packing lunch, going out there racing all day till sunset. Just wanting to kind of continue that sort of legacy that I hear about. That's really important to me.
Hope you enjoyed that. So, singing quail is an Ojibwe from, Red Cliff. And she's doing more research. This is all part of her graduate studies. And, she has, which one? Let's try that. She has, enlisted others. Now, I was actually asked to be interviewed for the next video, and I was the only historic researcher. Dr. Raymond Allen from Lac de Flambeau is the one who videoed me. He works at the Trout Lake Limnology Center, and the work that's going on there is really quite amazing. So there are folks out there actively trying to communicate. I would encourage you to take these links and share them with others. With your Lake Owners Association, for people on your lakes, to try to have a better appreciation for the gravity of Manoomin over the course of history and the kind of efforts that are being taken. So yeah, the Center for Limnology is doing huge studies, and I've been working with them because I'm always the history guy. You know what I mean? You noticed all my pictures from my presentation that were in her video. So we share all this stuff. It's all cool. But the work that's done at the Limnology Center is amazing. The wild rice has, the DNR has wild rice strategic analysis and are working with the tribes as well. I've done work with Vilas County Land and Water Group. I took them from Round Lake down to Big Lake, showed them all the cultural resources about the rice and so on. And when you read their 25 to 34 management, wild rice is 27 times in a search. They're actively talking about this at the county level as well. So we have the DNR and so on. So there's a movement afoot. Are you with me? And that this idea of preservation, this is not a nuisance weed. I can take you to places in Manitowish waters where people pull all the wild rice up because they want to just have that pristine look out from their lake or something like that. This is my house. I've been looking at wild rice there for 30 years, and I'll tell you what's happened. My wild rice doesn't grow anymore, and it's these guys right here. And they're, look at this, they saw it right off, and they show up every other day to hit every tender shoot that comes up. You can go to lakes like Aurora or Partridge Lake and alike, and you can find these PVC pipe things with snow fencing around it because they're trying to isolate wild rice from these predators. And, you know, the discussion of how we move forward, maybe, you know, in part a game management plan. Again, I'm not involved in this, but I see this evolving and being quite a concern. But I can tell you, in the last 10 years, we've had no rice, and it's because of geese and ducks. So this is the area around what is Alder Lake today. This is, I live right there, okay, wild rice in front of me. And this shows all the townships around us, including Arvavida, Boulder Junction. But there's also concerns about invasive species. And you need to be aware of that. We now have milfoil. Yeah, the bad stuff, Eurasian milfoil. And you see here are all the milfoil hits from Manitwish Lake to Alder Lake. This is where my house is right here. And you know, we got one there and a bunch down in this area. This is wild rice. This is Boulder Junction right there. And the Ojibwe are not going to let communities, in my opinion, use liquid herbicide to kill Eurasian milfoil because they don't want their wild rice to be damaged. And this could be a point of disagreement in strategy. So we see a lot of vectors coming together here and trying to find, you know, best management practices. There's an enormous amount of ongoing and current research that's being done. And I really recommend that you and your lake owners associations within your town boards, within, you know, your groups, think about this, talk about it, and I hope that maybe some of you become advocates for the advancement of Manoomin. So as you go from the earliest time of this Seth Eastman one to old pictures of harvest to modern harvest today, Manoomin is not something in the past, it is something that is alive today. And if you want to really learn a lot more about it, go see Teresa Mitchell at the George Brown Museum and Cultural Center, Ojibwe Museum and Cultural Center. The whole focus of their diorama on this. Go to a powwow or go to the Wisconsin State Historical Society Ojibwe storytelling. Greg Johnson, Leon Valier, all from Lac du Flambeau and others. And other Ojibwe stories there are available. I would share with you, if you want to go back and look at something really neat, Chippewa Customs, which was written over 100 years ago by an ethnologist by the name of Francis Densmore, really talks about those cultural histories of the Ojibwe and harvesting rice, mostly in Minnesota, but her work is good. And this book you can get from Lithwick, and it talks about plants used by the Ojibwe people. You can order it online right from Lithwick itself, and they talk about all plants. It would be, I think, a good present to give to a friend who really loves the Northwoods, who wants to learn more about the Northwoods, its plants, its histories, and where we are today. So those are really great resources. So the Ojibwe prophecy, the start of the migration, is still alive today, and many people are working very hard to try to preserve Manoomin going forward. Well, thank you very much. I hope I get a few converts out of it. Tribal, governmental groups, non-governmental groups, and alike to move things forward. If any of you have questions, I'd be happy to entertain a few. Yes.
The wild rice that you see in, like, say, Rice-A-Roni or whatever in the supermarket, where does that come from?
That's from commercial marshes, mostly on the West Coast and places like that. Yeah, it doesn't taste any, for those of you who harvest, the wild rice we harvest here, it's a different color, a different texture, it cooks different, it tastes different. So get authentic rice. That black stuff that kind of hurts your teeth that you buy, that's commercial. Okay, the wild rice, you saw it there, it almost looks like popcorn when it opens up. It's amazing. Its aroma is different, all of it. And you hear that again and again in the videos, right? Yes,
But where can you find the real rice?
you have to go to the reservation or buy it from people, but make sure you get authentic rice. Yeah, that's really tricky. Or make friends with the rice. There's a lot of work in making rice. I hope you don't mind spiders. When they laid all the rice out on the plastic, that's to get the bugs and worms out. Yeah, it's not a absolutely clean experience. There's a lot of different steps. Yes,
So a lot of the areas that you were talking about were really west of downtown here.
yes.
Do you know anything much about east of the H&K Dam, further upstream on the Manoomin River? My dad would talk about wild rice in the bay in Boulder Lake where the river comes in back, 100 years ago, how thick it was. And, again, we would talk about it was the women who were harvesting in the late summer, early fall. But there hasn't been any rice on that lake since I was born, so 70-some years.
Right, and I don't know personally about that patch of wild rice. But I know that there was wild rice in the Manoomin River. You had the 1-2 punch of dams here, because you had the H&K Dam, and then you had the Fish Trap Dam, and then you had blowaway dams up Nixon and Partridge Creek. So when they were driving logs, I mean, it's hard to drive logs this far up the watershed. And then, those logs come to Manoomin waters and they're pulled by steamboats at that juncture. But it's resilient. It does come back, and I don't know why it hasn't. But I think if I were to point you to an area, I would point you to Papoose Creek and how strong that's coming in right there on County K. And then, the question I think is, why doesn't it come back there? Now, to my recollection, the outlet of the Manoomin River into Boulder Lake is more sand than it is silt. Is that correct?
This is where you stand.
I'm sorry.
But again, you need what the realtors call fisherman frontage, that mucky kind of stumpy, not the nice sand. So again, I'm not a geomorphologist and I can't recall exactly. Yes.
You didn't mention Little Rice Lake,
Oh, yeah,
which was the best.
right.
I grew up in Boulder and I used to go down and pick it myself. And there were all kinds of Indians down there picking it.
Right. And I think Little Rice Lake was on the Glyphwood map, right?
I didn't see it.
Well, I'll go back and
But
look at
not, there's quite a bit of rice below Fish Trap Dam now too in the river.
Is that the lake you're talking about? Is that right behind the business?
Yeah.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Yeah, it was just full of rice.
Yeah, I started ricing, and that was the first lake I riced was, when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of people in there, a lot of natives in there.
So here's Boulder here's Boulder Lake. So you have here and here. This is probably the one you're speaking of right here. This is the Trout River. So yeah, I think they did cite it.
Yeah.
Or the Manoomin River.
And I found arrowheads down there, so I know they've been on that, for
Yeah,
hundreds of years.
That's good. Well, but you raised that question. So, if you find artifacts like that, you should take pictures of them and report them so we can get them in the archaeological site index so it's protected and, people don't take those things. We're having a real problem with people looting sites. Metal detectors have never been better, never been cheaper, and people are going out and stealing artifacts on public and private property. They dupe private property owners, and it's really been a challenge. But to the end, yes, there's rights there. But as I said before, I'm an evidentiary historian. You're the first person who ever talked to me about an experience there, and I need, pictures, accounts, things like that. We have, looks like they recognize that area. But I just go where I have evidence to share. And if you've got evidence, or Boulder Junction Historical Society, the more we share, the more people will join in and hopefully try to preserve this. Yes,
I've got a question. We just kayaked, we put in a lower dam outside of Fish Trap
right,
and went through fairly substantial wild rice.
okay.
What stage is it in that it was like red hanging down? What stage is that?
That's when it flowers.
That's when it's.
Right now, it's in the flower stage.
Okay.
So it goes from lay down to upright, the flower comes, it pollinates, and then the seed heads go up. And that diagram I went over real quick. But
So
that's
harvest would be like in. late
last
August?
week of August, first weekish of September, you know, based on weather and other breaks. We've had a lot of timely rains this year. Right in there. If you go down to, either Rice Creek or Island Lake, you'll see indigenous and non-tribal members harvesting, very heavily. Yes.
So east side, we're in Woodland, they sell wild rice in the fall, late summer. From Minnesota or Eagle River, is the Eagle River?
I don't know that. You have to look at it, but if you look at it, I'm colorblind, but it's almost like a gray and green color by comparison. It's not that black.
No, it's then it's not, but so in Flambeau where they sell firecrackers, there's a.
Yes,
They
there
sell
is.
wild rice, but it's very expensive, but now I know why.
That's why. Exactly. You see those moccasins dancing around? There are processors there. Go to the, George Brown Jr. Museum and Cultural Center and talk to Teresa. Her husband harvests rice, they process it themselves. There are Ojibwe who are available, who want to tell the story to you. Go down there and listen to it, and it's really fun. Yes,
So I have two questions. First is, if I have fisherman's frontage,
I do too.
could that grow wild rice?
You could.
Second
Do you have
question, would I get in trouble if I broadcast wild rice on my property with the DNR?
If you got caught.
Yeah,
Would
probably.
I get in trouble if I did? I would.
See, but the ducks also move wild rice around too, and so do the geese, so, you know, these are things that, have been discussed, and you saw the Ojibwe receding on, you know, this is their land, they have tribal, they have treaty rights and access to gather and harvest and propagate. But, it's been done before and I've never heard of an arrest. How's that?
But you have to do it the right way. You can't just buy wild rice at the grocery store.
No.
And throw it, and that's, the Germans did. You have to harvest fresh, ripe, wild rice and throw it in the water right then.
And the current's key, because when it comes off, there's a husk. Whatever you do, do not eat the wild rice when it comes off, because it has little barbs on it that go down the duck's throats, so that they have to ingest it and then they exit it, and, you know, sometimes that can be still alive and be planting. But in addition to that, with that husk, it's got a point at the bottom, and it goes down, point down, and it goes into their fisherman frontage, the muck, and it's got a little hair at the top. And that little hair needs just a little bit of current to give it the wiggle it needs to scoop down into the soil to the right place. But I can tell you, this is an interesting thing. You know, we talk about that. We lower the water in Manitoush waters 3.5 feet. And when that rice seed goes down and the water goes all the way out and it freezes hard there, we get wild rice the same spot the next year. And these are annuals. This is all coming up. So it is pretty resilient, but you have to have, do you have flowing water by your property? Then it's not the same. It's different in that regard. Great questions. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So today, what are the dams used to manage? Are they just,
The dams,
yeah, I
manage
mean, they were
water.
for timber, right? Initially.
This is such a great question. We're at the North Lakeland Discovery Center. We're creating the Northwoods Forest History Experience. It'll be in an old CCC building, and we're gonna have 6 exhibits in there. And one of it is on the cutover, and I'm the exhibit coordinator for that. And that is exactly one of our topics. They went from River Drive logging White Pine. And here on the Chippewa River flowage, which we're all on in this neck of the woods, a guy named E.P. Sherry, who had a paper mill in Park Falls, the Flambeau Mill, okay, that is now closed. And what he did is that he created the Turtle Flambeau flowage to sell water downstream. Because it wasn't River Drive logging, but like tolls, he could sell it. Just like you go through tolls in Chicago, they're selling water downstream to the paper companies and the hydro plants. And they're still doing it, but it's now XL Energy that owns all of that. Or if you own that mill, you get that hydro power. All right. So they're selling hydro power. And I had a guy on my pontoon tour today from Chippewa Falls. He told me this story today. Your question's amazing. They'll literally control all the dams. So the first hydro dams in Park Falls, but they can control the dams going up and they can do it electronically and they know how to release that water so they can hit peak times. And I fished the Turtle Flambeau flowage a lot and the water's gone down like more than a foot in a short period of time. Well, duh. The heat wave, everybody's air conditioning, they're releasing that water on a time schedule that it'll hit the turbines at peak time at each of their hydro dams so they can maximize their profits. That's how, coordinated it is today. So literally that water, that power, that is all part of how they manage it. So they go from River Drive logging, and then they used to use it for the paper mills because they use sulfite paper making, and then they needed to cleanse that. That's how we got polluted rivers, after World War II, let's say. And now today they use it for power. You may not have heard this, but speaking of that, and it's a complete aside, like it just boggles me. The Flambeau paper mill, the closest mill to here, you go downstream, it's out of business. You know what they make right now? They make crypto. There are people from China who bought that and they're using the hydropower there to make cryptocurrency because it needs so much electricity and it's free through there.
And the governor didn't listen when I told him not to let them do that.
Well, I believe you. How's that? But at any rate, that was an NPR story like a year ago. It's just, and it may not be going on, but it's just too good of a story not to share. But the water and the water resources, everybody thinks that the water wars are out west where it's more arid. That is not the case. The water wars have been here. I could do a whole presentation on that. Maybe I should. Because it involves you, because your dams are at the very height of it. But see, just because we're on the top of the watershed doesn't keep us out of the mix of all that decision making. Yes.
Wisconsin Valley Improvement, I believe, handles the level of water in the Manoomin chain.
Right, that's the Wisconsin River.
Yeah. Now, the way I was told is they've got limitations on how much they can drop.
They have memorandums of understanding, and these have been banned. You're correct.
I'm not that familiar with this area up here, but are there the same limitations on?
No, they vary. Really good question. They vary widely. Operating orders or memorandums of understanding, and they can be mixed between them. And we've had the Russ Lake Dam use litigated 4 different times, starting in 1914, going to 2016. They changed everything, and they did it through an amendment to the budget, and now it's state statute. It's cleverly hidden. It says when a lake in Vilas County greater than 4,000 acres and a value of this will control its water level. So Manitowish Waters gets a pass on that.
Sure.
But other groups like in the Turtle Flambeau, they have that agreement, but it can fluctuate far more greatly.
What's really strange is you look at the Manoomin chain and then you get down by Nokomis, north and
Yeah.
south.
Oh, and they'll drain that right down.
Right, and it's basically the same river system.
But if you go to the Eau Plaine and Lake Dubay, because I worked in Marshfield, the Eau Plaine, they will drop that to an absolute desert and then jack it back up. So yeah, these operating orders, and these are all different groups in every different watershed that operate. And all of this is really relevant because it affects the quality of rice. And there was a lot of ricing that used to be done around Marshfield. Okay, but that rice is not, and it was out of the system of the Eau Plaine River and so on. But again, dams are at work at this, and this is all part of the food sovereignty for the Ojibwe as well.
One more question, I'll be
Oh,
quiet.
no worries.
I was trying to find a positive in something bad. Now, when they dammed up these rivers.
Yeah.
For the logging purposes, and the water level was raised 10, 12, 15 feet, whatever.
Sure.
Wouldn't that create more area, that would be suitable for wild rice?
Eventually, right. Near term, it's destruction. Okay,
Yeah.
that and Big Lake escaped that, so that's why you get all that kind of work there. And that might be why the lake you were speaking of, it would have been dammed by those dams that were done at H&K and Fish Trap and the outwash, and for the near term. But it, it's resilient and it comes back. Ultimately, though, that has happened. It happened. I mean, in front of, I don't know if you've been on the flowage much, but I spent a lot of time there. There's this place off of Murray's Landing called Boney's Mount. And there's gotta be, I don't know, 600 acres of open water out there, and it's all about 4 and 5 feet. And at one point, it was all wild rice, and it was really good wild rice, and the fishing was really good. And I was there this morning, and there's not a speck of it there. Not a speck.
How about Aliquosh?
I haven't been to Aliquosh recently, but certainly that's one of
It's
the.
gone downhill too.
Is it?
Yeah, there's hardly any on Alakosh. And even the Little Rice Lake here, there's hardly any left on that.
Well, Rice Lake and Mercer has the same problem. So again, when you listen to Bill Poupart up there, right, the wild rice chief, I had the good fortune when we did the research with Cindy and John Broyhan for this nomination for Historic Places District, to sit in with the wild rice chiefs and to talk to them and talk about, archaeology and preservative sites. And I actually cooked a walleye meal for them as a thank you. So this is kind of a thing you do with tribal communities. So I served them fish at that time, and it was really quite neat. I think the point of that story is that when he said, we're down to an eighth, this is kind of what we're seeing. And what's encouraging, the good news is that there are so many people actively involved trying to untie this riddle. The bad news is there's no definitive smoking gun here to explain what we can talk about, the changes in winters, the water, and nighttime high and low temperatures. I mean, these are the same arguments for the decline of the walleye population that you have. But things are changing. But let me just give you a little hope. How's that?
Okay.
So I've done a lot of work in archaeology. Okay, and during the Archaic period, and that was from 8,000 years ago to about 4,000 years ago, it was much drier. And you say, Jim, well, how much is that? That Lake Michigan was 100 feet lower than it is today. Do you understand? Now that is over a long period of time and so on. But we see these episodes, through archaeology and where sites are and so on, that there are these kind of fluctuations, and it does create hardship. And so there's a lot we don't know. But I know what we need is informed people who are advocating for preserving Manoomin and that habitat, so that we can have it going forward for both tribal and non-tribal communities. That's kind of why I did this. It's the first time I've gone to a big group And your questions have been inspiring, so I may stick with this one. But Boulder Junction has a huge role in this story because of all the places we just cited right here in your area and your connections to the Ojibwe communities. I mean, as strong or stronger than most communities around here. So that means you got work to do though, right? You gotta get there. All right, well, thank you so much.